Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is the First Days of Choir, Part 6, Installing a Personhood Curriculum. What even is the point of a solid, well-installed choral vocal pedagogy for young people? Why does it matter? Is it just to make good performers, or is it something deeper? In this episode, as the sixth part of the popular First Days of Choir series on the podcast, which is inspired, of course, by Harry Wong's The First Days of School, we engage in a thoughtful discussion on the role of anti-fragility in education. We explore how facing challenges can help students grow and adapt. We also discuss how our curriculums can set up these challenges almost in a playground sense, in a safe sense, where they can experience the challenges in an environment with bumpers, so to speak. Through the lens of art, we consider ways to build the whole person, integrating creativity and critical thinking into the curriculum. Join me for this whole episode as we explore strategies to nurture adaptable, well-rounded individuals in an ever-changing world. It might be more relevant now than ever. The strategies for teachers in this episode include both personal balance with the job, but also the value of authenticity in the classroom and its role in our mental health, and how those things spiral back on the curriculum. It's impossible to pull them apart, actually. Our curriculum is us, and that's from right out of the very beginning of Harry Wong's book. The teacher is the most important resource in the classroom. The segments from this episode are pulled from one of the most popular presentations that I've ever given in the Choralosophy repertoire, and this recording was originally presented at Alabama ACDA back in 2022. But I'm using some of the clips now and interspersing them as part of this series because it's kind of where the Harry Wong inspiration for this series came from. And it's also a safe bet that most of you listening to this were not in the Choralosophy audience back in 2022 when this episode first aired. So stick around for excerpts from The Arts of Personhood and Shining Eyes, which was episode 112. This is not the entire episode. I encourage you to also go back to 112 and watch the whole presentation, but this is a clipped out version of that with some of the key points that are related to our Back to School series. In many ways, it reframes the first 5 parts of this series into a philosophical treatise on why all of these pedagogical ideas are so important in installing a personhood curriculum. So tune in and have your thinking stimulated and challenged, and I hope to God I say something you disagree with, because then you can go over to the Choralosopher's Facebook page and tell me about it. Of course, in a polite way, so I don't have to kick you out. Then weigh in yourself with any ideas or stories or thoughts about the episode that spring to mind. And of course, don't forget to get your Better Conversation Activist t-shirt or mug over at choralosophy.com/shop. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the Choralosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. And one of those benefits is a shout out on the show. Shout outs for the Inner Circle and producer tiers go to Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Ulrike Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. I love that Jim made me be the guy that made everyone come back from lunch. Yes, I know. I'm the bad guy every time. And then tonight I get to keep you from dinner, which will be great. So yes, thank you for coming back and to hear some more thoughts. This afternoon's session is going to be very different than what we talked about this morning. So if you did miss this morning, I mostly covered my thoughts and practices in grading and assessment because I do believe that the way we set up our class for our kids, the infrastructure that is built, the system that's built underneath them is hugely related and guiding us into whether or not they can be successful. So that part is important. But then there is the next part. And I mentioned this morning, too, how important I think the book, The First Days of School by Harry Wong was and is and still should be. Because one of the things that it reveals in a research-based way is to kind of point out and remind us as teachers that there is really one factor that provides some kind of predictability to whether or not a student is going to be successful, and that is you. It's the teacher, and there are there's a lot of ways to measure that. But is the teacher engaged? Is the teacher active in their professional organizations? You've already got that going for you. You're here. Are these teachers that are seeking professional development? So he's got this whole thing, if you read that book, of like, what is it, if teachers check off this box, this box, this box, and this box, if they do all those things, there's a huge likelihood that those students are going to be more successful. And then the teacher who, what I will affectionately call paycheck collectors, the ones who just show up. I was talking to Jim on the way back from lunch just now, as I was kind of getting my ideas for this session going fresh in my brain. I have the opportunity where my chamber choir at my school, they have to give up their lunch in order to be in the chamber choir because it's the only time during the day that we can do it. And so what the benefit of that is we get to have a lot of social time because they get their rehearsal in real quick, and then I send them down to the lunchroom, they grab their food, and they come back. And that's our chance to, while they're eating, maybe we can listen to concert recordings, we can watch YouTube videos of a piece, and we're together, but they're eating. And so then I'll sit around and I'll hear them say things like, Mr. Simpson, the math teacher, he's just awful. I hate that teacher. And they don't know I'm listening, but I'm just like walking around. And I'll just come up and I'll say, so what's wrong with Mr. Simpson? Why don't you like Mr. Simpson? And they'll have all kinds of reasons, like the class is too hard, he's confusing, he gives us too much homework, all those answers. But then I'll ask a few other questions, leading questions, and it doesn't matter who the kid is or which teacher they didn't like. Ultimately, what it comes down to is I finally get them to reveal that the teacher just really clearly does not like being there. And the reason they don't like him or her is not because the teacher is bad, doesn't know their stuff, not because Mr. Simpson doesn't know math. It's because there isn't an infectious joy that will get a kid who doesn't already like math to like math. Okay? So in music, it's no different ultimately. And so today's little talk and discussion, because I do want, this will probably end up being a little bit more of a discussion, is probably the least exciting title for any session that you'll ever want to go to, where I might suggest to you that you are the problem. We are the problem. If things are not going the way we want them in our classroom, ultimately, we are the only one who we can control. It's not the principal's fault. It's not the school district's fault. Ultimately, those are our kids and our care in that classroom at that time. So let's dig into a couple things. The very first thing you're going to see is actually a clip from a YouTube video, a TED Talk, that I recommend you watching in its entirety. Some of you might have already seen it. It's called The Transformative Power of Classical Music by Benjamin Zander, okay? Now, in our context, I would just like you to mentally transfer out the word classical and put choral, group singing, whatever it is. Because to me, the metaphor is the same. In his world, he's an orchestral conductor. So his world, he says classical music. The whole time I'm watching it, I'm thinking, okay, that's what he's saying about what he does is very much like what I do.
Now, I had an amazing experience. I was 45 years old. I've been conducting for 20 years. And I suddenly had a realization. The conductor of an orchestra doesn't make a sound. My picture appears on the front of the CD. But the conductor doesn't make a sound. He depends for his power on his ability to make other people powerful. And that changed everything for me. It was totally life-changing. People in my orchestra came up to me and said, Ben, what happened? That's what happened. I realized my job was to awaken possibility in other people. And of course, I wanted to know whether I was doing that. And you know how you find out? You look at their eyes. If their eyes are shining, you know you're doing it. You could light up a village with this guy's eyes. Right. So if the eyes are shining, you know you're doing it. If the eyes are not shining, you get to ask a question. And this is the question. Who am I being that my player's eyes are not shining? We can do that with our children too. Who am I being that my children's eyes are not shining? That's a totally different world. Now, we're all about to end this magical on the mountain week, and we're going back into the world. And I say it's appropriate for us to ask the question, who are we being as we go back out into the world? And you know, I have a definition of success. For me, it's very simple. It's not about wealth and fame and power. It's about how many shining eyes I have around me. So now I have one last thought, which is that it really makes a difference what we say, the words that come out of our mouth. I learned this from a woman who survived Auschwitz, one of the rare survivors. She went to Auschwitz when she was 15 years old. And her brother was 8, and the parents were lost. And she told me this. She said, we were in the train going to Auschwitz, and I looked down and I saw my brother's shoes were missing. And I said, why are you so stupid? Can't you keep your things together, for goodness sake? The way an elder sister might speak to a younger brother. Unfortunately, it was the last thing she ever said to him because she never saw him again. He did not survive. And so when she came out of Auschwitz, she made a vow. She told me this. She said, I walked out of Auschwitz into life, and I made a vow. And the vow was, I will never say anything that couldn't stand as the last thing I ever say. Now, can we do that? No, and we'll make ourselves wrong and others wrong. But it is a possibility to live into. Thank you.
Who am I being that my students' eyes are not shining? The first question you ask, not which principal I can blame, not because they changed my schedule last year and I like my schedule last year better, not because they lowered my budget. Who am I being that my students' eyes are not shining? And I think it is the most important question. He started to tell his story, and I recommend watching the whole thing. This was a transformative YouTube video, TED Talk for me to watch in my career because it came out many years ago. It's got millions of views now. But I mentioned this morning that we put on videos at my school while we're individually assessing people. So I found this video in that same way. I was at the last minute searching up just TED Talks about music because I got to put something on so I can go in the practice room. And I came back and ended up watching one of these. And this moment was profound for me because it made me think in terms, again, of turning the mirror around on myself. So my personal story with this transformation is that when I started at Lee Summit High School, where I currently teach, this is 17 years ago, I had just come out of my master's degree in conducting. I had been teaching adjunct at the college. I'd been directing college choirs, teaching college voice lessons, doing all kinds of fancy things. And my expectation, very similarly to as we heard this morning, of thinking it was all about me when I stood up in front of the room. My thought was, I've just been teaching at the collegiate level. I am now teaching at the high school level. What I will do is I will show up on the podium on the first day and I will impress them with how much I know. And that is the way to get the high school kids to sing for me. And then, I don't know if I'm allowed to say words like this, but they don't give a shit. They just don't care. They don't care. What they care about eventually is they want to know that I would wrestle a bear for them. And then they actually do like that I know stuff. But it has to go in that order, whereas the college students, again, no offense to college students or teachers, but when I was teaching the college students, they're paying tuition to get a degree in music. They were using me for my mind, and that was the dynamic. They wanted to know what I knew, and if I didn't know anything, then they get out of here and bring in a professor who knows what they're doing. But high school kids are not that way, right? And because they're not yet to that point where they're paying that tuition. So this was a humbling, very, very humbling moment for me where I realized it doesn't matter how much I know until they know that I'm there for them, with them. Another really good young life example for me, where I just want to at least start this conversation by telling some stories where you see that I'm turning the mirror on myself too. I had this opportunity when I was a young teacher as part of a graduate school program to film myself teaching a lesson. And then part of the assignment was to take that video of me filming the lesson and take it to one of my mentors or my former teachers or somebody I look up to as a teacher, show them the video and let them give me feedback. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity for me to show off. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to teach a choir class. I'm going to film it, and I'm going to bring it to my old high school choir teacher, who was my hero. And I'm going to show him. And in my fantasy, in my mind, he was just going to start weeping with pride and talking about how amazing this choir rehearsal was that I just led and how wonderful it was. And he was going to talk about all the big words I used and how impressive that was. And the first thing he said to me after watching that video is he stopped for a second. He looked up and he said, "Chris, I was bored to tears that whole time. And I was crushed. I wanted affirmation. But I said, ultimately, why? I thought that was so interesting. And because this is, of course, a man that knew me when I was 14. And he's like, I know you would think all those things were interesting. You're a nerd. And I was like, yeah, okay. But there was lots of interesting things in there. And he goes, Chris, ultimately, the reason I was bored is because I know you. You're funny. You're energetic. You're a good speaker. But the whole time you were lecturing like you were the only one in the room. And of course, I was crushed. But I needed to hear all that. He said, someday you will be a great teacher when you let your kids get to know you. Okay? So ultimately, that's what this is about. Who am I being that my students' eyes are not shining? Ultimately, asking that question first. So I talked a little bit as we started about Harry Wong's book. I'm going to kind of touch on that occasionally throughout this. But the quality of the educator is number one factor in student outcomes. Now, where do we get our quality from? I believe, I shouted out earlier this morning that my favorite director was Eve Ely, and I said his authenticity. What I mean by that? I meant authenticity in that I believed when I was in Dr. Ely's choir that the Dr. Ely that I was seeing on the podium was the same one that I would see if I was talking to him in the hall, is the same one that I would see if I went to his church, is the same one I would see that he presents to everyone else. How ourselves can we be? Because I believe very strongly that the more authentic, more truly ourselves we can be in front of our classes, the more at ease we will be. Now think of it this way. If I have to interact with you as my students, say you're all part of my choir, and something happens within the choir rehearsal in which I have to react in that moment, right? Whether it's react to discipline a student, react to praise a student, whatever it is, if I have to filter my reaction through a version of myself that I've been working on to present to the students, okay, it is going to delay the reaction, and it's also going to put me in some form of stress. Because basically, guys, that's lying. And when we lie, there's that little moment in our brain where we stop to think about how is this going to come out? That's inauthenticity. So one of the things that I believe, I really, really believe, that my turn, kind of like Mr. Zander said in that talk, my turn in my career was when I figured out that it was okay for me to just be me in front of my class. I was going to shed some of the things I'd been taught in undergrad, where how formal you are in front of your students is going to determine your success. You've got to keep that separation. There's something to that. I'm not their friend. But at the same time, I also had to figure out how to be me. And so that means if I'm going to be me, this was advertised as a philosophical session, so just dig in. So then that gets us to the next place. If I'm going to be me in the rehearsal, what is the me that I'm bringing? Is it my best self? Because if I'm authentically bitter, okay, then that takes it back to my lunchroom conversations with my kids. I will be the teacher they don't like because I don't like to be there. Okay? So it is on me to figure out a way to like to be there. Okay? And that means, again, maybe, for some teachers, deciding that the kids deserve better than me right now. And that is because it is on us. It is on us. And for most of our kids, we are the only music teacher that they will ever have in that kind of context. For us, we get to pick a job. We could go apply somewhere else. We could go back to grad school if things aren't working out. We've got options. Our kids don't, especially our public school kids that show up based on zip code. We are what they have. So it is a big responsibility. Okay, I figured this would be an unfamiliar territory for some of us, so I want to put it in some context for us. So Nassim Taleb is a mathematician who coined and invented, his first language is not English. And so he noticed that in our language, we don't have a word to describe what happens to a thing that when you bust it up or stress it or push it or break it, it actually grows back stronger. Okay? And so he made up the term anti-fragile to describe that. So the idea being that with an anti-fragile system, you can actually harm it by protecting it. Okay? So the examples would be the immune system, and on his chart there you noticed one of the examples is children. So, and that's really, really an important concept. So one of the things that I strive for, and this is going to play into this idea of how I run my classroom, but also just some things for you to chew on. I, as a human, have to recognize that I benefit from anti-fragility as well. In other words, I'll share with you just one personal thing where, are you guys familiar with the concept of ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences? It's a reference to trauma in childhood. So ACEs, if you're a psychologist and you're dealing with a kid who's got childhood trauma, you will give them all kinds of questions and try to figure out some of their life experiences to come up with an ACEs score, which is some type of a matrix to measure childhood trauma. This is not intended to be, I'm not presenting this information to you to put myself on a victim platform, but my ACEs score is 8, which means that my childhood trauma is such a high level that according to the statistics, I should be an alcoholic and I should be in prison, okay? I won't go into the details today, but my ACEs score is very high. The typical kid goes their entire life with 8 out of 8. Yeah. So the typical kid, if they've experienced something that would be clinical trauma, might be a 1 or a 2. Okay. I was fortunate in my life because I had an infrastructure around me to help me not go a different direction. A lot of our kids don't have that. So I can experience those traumatic things, but because I had a community around me to be there with me, I was able to get through that time and grow up to be, some people actually like being around me. And so the reason I share that with you is I would not go back to those childhood experiences and choose to have those ever again. But it also would be disingenuous for me to say that those did not make me the person that I am in a lot of the ways that I am the most proud of myself now. That's anti-fragility. It is the idea that I am stronger because of those experiences, but that is not the same as saying that experiences were good and we should all have them. It's not the same thing. So we can have these complicated ideas around trauma and around adverse experiences, and then we start to wrap our mind around what the concept of anti-fragility means. So I strive as a teacher to be an anti-fragile teacher so that I can create anti-fragile choirs. Okay? Which is why I make kids sing by themselves. That's for a different conversation. Okay. So again, there are situations in which protecting children can harm them. And that is psychological truth. It can make you feel uncomfortable, but it is the way it is, okay? It is the way it is. Now notice, again, complicated ideas. He is not saying you should never protect children. That's not what he's saying. There are situations in which protecting the child can harm them, okay? I'm going to tell one more story. I'm a podcaster. I go off the cuff sometimes. I have a parenting anti-fragility story. This will be me trying to not cry. Okay, here we go. My daughter, she's 14 now. She was born prematurely. Basically, short version of why that happened, my wife's amniotic fluid had gone. Basically, we didn't know. Routine checkup. I get a phone call. You got to go to the hospital right now. Your kid's coming. And I was like, already? What's going on? Wife's at the doctor's office. Can I go home and get a bag? They're like, no, we got to go now because your daughter might be suffocating. There's not enough oxygen in there because there's no fluid. So I get to the hospital. They get her out. Everything's fine. She's born safely. They induced. But then we started to notice that there was possible damage from that experience as she got older. Everything was delayed. Every motor skill, fine motor, large motor, just took her so much longer. She didn't take her first step at all until 22 months. Okay? And even that was me with my hand kind of like going like this. That was the first step at all. So independent walking, not even until she was 2.5, maybe 3. Fine motor skills were really delayed, so most kids by 2 or 3 can already start to operate a finger independently. She couldn't make them go like that. And so she was probably 3, 4 maybe by this point, and I was took her to the park, like dads do, and I'm sitting on the bench, and I'm watching her run around with the other kids her age, which of course are running circles around her up and down the equipment. And you know how some playground equipment has those it's like a diagonal ramp, but it's got those little rock climbing things on it, and so they can climb up that way. She saw her friends doing it, and she wanted to climb up, and she got up, and her little fingers were too weak, and she would grab, and then she'd slip and fall down, and she'd grab, and God love her, the one thing, she's a fighter, that kid, and she would grab and fall down, and of course the other kids are going circles around her the whole time, and I'm sitting over there on the bench, and I had to literally put my hands under my butt, because I wanted so badly to go over there and lift her so she could experience the top like the other kids. And I was fighting it, and I kept, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to go. And finally, after about 45 minutes, she made it to the top. And she turned around and looked at me from on top of that thing with a smile that would have lit up a sun. And had I gotten up and lifted her, I would have robbed her of that moment because she would never have learned that she could do it. She could do it. I told you. I don't know if you've heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, you've got to go try 3-Minute Theory. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and you can check it out now when you decide to get this comprehensive system of pre-made materials for your music theory related concepts. You just go into that account and pull out tons of ready-made material. I don't think you'll be even able to teach all of it in 1 year. It's so much stuff that you can tailor make and custom make to your needs. So go check it out, and of course use the Choralosophy discount code when you sign up to get a 15% discount on your membership. There are situations in which protecting the child can harm them. So again, in this topic, in this conversation, we are still in that area of the teacher's mind, which, as we've discussed already today, the teacher's mind is a big predictor of where the students' minds will go. So some of these things are from the discipline of cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as CBT. This is kind of the gold standard of how we make people fix themselves through going to a therapist or whatever. And people who engage in these distortions, this is a list, it's small on the screen, and I'm going to read several of them. So people who engage in these distortions are typically unhappy and ineffectual in their long-term careers. So let's go through some of them. Filtering, which is defined here as focusing on the negative while ignoring the positive. Catastrophizing, which is expecting the worst-case scenario and, again, minimizing the positive. Polarized thinking, which is all-or-nothing thinking that ignores complexity. It's either good, it's evil. Heaven's reward fallacy, expecting self-sacrifice in order to get a reward. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple for time. Some of these I want you to think about how often you see these exhibited on Facebook. Global labeling, which is the extreme generalization of people, places, and things. All the shoulds. We hold tight to personal rules of behavior and judges the self and others if rules are broken. Another way you could put that is purity culture. Another one, always being right. Being wrong is unacceptable. Being right supersedes everything. So I mentioned before, the turning the mirror on ourselves. I told the story about how I was going to impress everyone. That one was mine. I needed to be right. I still enjoy being right, but I actually get more benefit now because I've reflected. I get more benefit out of the learning so that I can be right next time. I can see that that's something I had to grow to do. I become happier by shedding that mental distortion. Here's another one. Overgeneralization assumes a rule from one experience. So you've had one experience with a thing, and now you just assume that that's always going to be the case, that negative thing that happened. Right? So what's the value here of recognizing these what he calls mental distortions? This is more of Jonathan Haidt's stuff. Okay, so the cognitive distortions, if we don't reflect on our use of them, because these are things that everybody does, by the way. Everybody does these things. But the more aware of what we're doing that we can be, the more likely we are to engage with the world as it is, and not as the little, the image of like the demon on one shoulder with the angel on the other shoulder that's like one's telling you a good thing and the other's telling you a bad thing. It's kind of like that. It's like, how much time do we spend listening to that bad little demon telling us all these horrible things? So the reason I chose to bring up Facebook with this is because social media actually is designed to reward all of those behaviors. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That is what they say. Okay? In other words, if you ever get a chance to listen to or read books, for example, anybody seen the, what's it called? I'm going to blank. It's the Netflix documentary thank you, Social Dilemma. Social Dilemma, made by one of the folks who was involved in the creating of some of those early social media algorithms. They flat out hired a team of psychologists to figure out how to design a platform to make sure that people would be doing those things as much as possible. It is not a coincidence that then teachers go on teacher Facebook groups and engage in all those behaviors and then take that negativity back into their classrooms, okay? These types of behaviors are cognitive distortions, and the faster you can spot them, the faster you can exist in social media without being dragged into it. It's like, oh, I recognize that it's trying to get me to overgeneralize here, or it's trying to get me to catastrophize here, or whatever, and then we can start to fight those things in ourselves. And I promise you, the you that you bring into your classroom starts to become a happier, more well-adjusted you. Your physical health, guys, matters too. I'm sorry to be the bad guy here, but it's not all this idea that we all kind of grew up with. I'm 42, and so I grew up in a time where medical science was still in that place where there was mental health and there's physical health. And now we really understand that it's more than that. The two are related to each other. They are related to each other, both in a metaphysical way, but also in a very real scientific way. If our bodies are not functioning efficiently, it's very difficult for our mind to. Okay, so I have my own personal experience with this as well. I spent most of my life, there was quite a bit more of me to love than there is now. And about age 30 or so, I was running pretty solid around 260, but with no muscle. It was bad. Okay, and I went to my doctor, and my doctor said, just very nonchalant, he goes, "How important is it to you to make it to 40? And I was like, "That's pretty important. I just had my daughter. At that point, she was 3. And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I haven't seen cholesterol labs on a 30-year-old male like that ever in my life." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And it kind of kicked me in the pants. But I'd never really been healthy, and went through a process. Probably by about age 35, I finally got my act together. And it's amazing what regular exercise for me. My drug of choice is I just go to the gym. It's my me time. I get there no matter what. Even if I was not feeling well the day before and I have to do like a really wimpy workout, like I'll just go just to go. Okay. Now that's important for me because it's not because I want to look a certain way. It's because I know that when I'm running my body as efficiently as possible, then my mind is running as efficiently as possible. I get better sleep. When I get better sleep, I'm a better dad, I'm a better husband, I'm a better teacher, and I walk into my classroom with the ability to, if the goal is to be myself, what kind of self am I going to be, right? All of these things matter. And gosh dang it, you deserve it. Your spirit emanates from you to your students. It is addictive. It is addictive. Have fun. Go on vacations. Get a hobby. And this kind of ties back into the cognitive distortions I read earlier. Look for the best things about the world and talk to your students about them. Are we encouraged to do that in our current culture? No, we are not. It's a crime. Does that mean we ignore bad things? No, go back to that first slide. It's not a question of ignoring bad things. It is a cognitive distortion, though, to ignore the good things. It is a cognitive distortion to ignore the bad things. We have to be intentional, though, in seeking out and figuring out reasons to talk to kids about them. Because kids are watching and they're learning from us. How do I look at the world? So this one, I tie this one together on this slide, on the spirit slide, because you guys familiar with what being a Pollyanna means? Like being overly optimistic, that everything's great when it's not great. It's not about that. It's not about that. It's about recognizing and being willing to articulate and work into your daily routine an appreciation for what we have. Okay? And so in a choir, in a classroom context, I do this a lot, and I do this very intentionally. What I do, essentially, is so in a choir context, here are some stories that I tell. I tell kids a lot how lucky we are in the U.S. that we get to have music education as part of our daily public instruction in a lot of places. We don't have it perfect here, and I acknowledge that. Like I tell them, if you talk to a bunch of music teachers in the U.S., we will complain about all the things we would like to have as better in our system, but there are a lot of kids that grow up in a lot of countries that don't have music in school at all. So can we be excited that we get to sing? We get to sing, and you get to come here basically for free because you live down the block, and you get to show up at this school, and you get to sing in a choir, and actually we're pretty good, and you get to just show up. And then I've got friends who grew up in England where they are not allowed to have choir during school. It is national law. Choir cannot occur from bell to bell, okay? Which is why to be in choir in England, if you're a kid, you have to be really, really good, because then you get recruited into one of the choir schools. But for most kids, the rank and file kids, they don't get to experience music education. So we talk about that in my class. How lucky, especially I pull out that kind of stuff when I see that they're losing motivation. Wait a minute, you don't want to sing today? How would you like to go to a school that doesn't ever get to sing? They have to do like math and science all day long. And they're like, really? Yeah. Okay, and because again, what I'm choosing to do is I'm choosing to help them frame it in an appreciative context. Not to ignore the things that we wish we could make better, but to help them appreciate what they have. And we've talked already quite a bit today about authenticity. But this one I want to develop just a little bit more. Authenticity is living with integrity. That's how I define it. It just means to live with integrity simply means I am who I say I am. It's not a value judgment. You could have one completely different set of values and live those set of values. I could have a completely different set of values and we could both live with integrity. As long as the values I say that I am and I embody, I actually am. So if I start telling myself, so here's my example. If you ask me, like, what are the things that I value and what order do I value them in? I will tell you that I value my family, I value my job in that order. Okay? But if my actual life reflects that I ignore my family so that I can do a better job at school, well, then I'm not living authentically. I'm living with low integrity. because I know it sounds better to tell people my family's my value, but then I don't come home from work until 9 p.m. Well, so then what's my actual value? My actual value is my job and then my family. So again, to me, that's what living, and that's an oversimple. I think I do recommend, actually, this is an exercise I have people do sometimes, where going beyond just family and job, but to actually write down your values sometime. Try to go about 10 deep and then put them in order. And then look at your calendar and decide whether or not you are actually living with integrity and living authentically. And it could be that you then realize that you need to rearrange some of your values or rearrange your life, one of the two. But it will take that in order to do that work of aligning your life with your values. I recently, 3 years ago, when I started the podcast, I stopped doing church work. And that was part of why. I was working all the time. Something had to give. And that was hard because you're like, oh, it pays me so much money. And, and we're going to have to get a new house, a smaller house. What do we do? And you have to sometimes make those tough decisions. The mind, the body, the spirit are connected, and they are very much related to whether or not we can be effective teachers. I really, really believe it. Take it all the way back to Benjamin Zander at the beginning. Who am I being that my students' eyes are not shining? If they're not shining, it's something that I need to fix because I'm the one who brings the energy. It is not my student's job to bring enthusiasm that day. That's my job. And so I try to be infectious as much as possible. And so all those things work together for me to be able to do that. Now, this next part is a little bit different as we try to think about maximizing not only our own mind, body, spirit, our energy, our contribution in the classroom, but also our knowledge. The overall talk, right, is maximize you. So we're going to talk about our knowledge of what it is that we teach. How invested in the most recent research are we? How invested in, I talked this morning quite a bit about the science of reading. Do I teach kids to read music? Do I know anything about how the brain works when we read? That's a problem. Those types of things, can we get into that? And right now, the educational trend is new fad programs. Raise your hand, public school teachers. Private school? Okay, so mostly public school or higher ed. Right? Professional developments. Got to go to them. You will show up, and it will always be the next new thing. Right? The next set of terminology that we must use, the next way we must rewrite our curriculum so that we match this terminology, and then and it's all stuff that they will tell you. This is the most recent, research-based kind of thing. But here's the thing, everyone: it's not research-based. It isn't. And the reason I say it isn't is because almost no educational research is empirical. We are infamous in education as far as the social sciences, because education is a social science, meaning a study of people. We are widely known in social science circles as to being the least rigorous in the way we do research. So if there is a new educational fad that you are being presented with, I'm not saying skip the PD, because you get fired, so you got to go, but go with a certain grain of salt and be willing to ask questions like, how do you know that this will work? Can we talk about the research a little bit? And what you will find, you guys can imagine my principles when I walk in the room. Because I do, and I've been asking this stuff for years. And what you will find is if they are willing to show or able to show any research at all to back up the recent fad, it will be a sample size probably of 50 or 60 kids that they studied this thing on once and then never recreated it. That is not science, people. It isn't. And that is what most of education research is. So when I say skip the fads, here's what I mean. I don't mean skip the meeting. I mean show up armed with your own knowledge. I'm going to talk about this more in a second, but show up knowing that this is a problem with just a little bit of healthy skepticism so that you can take whatever it is that this new program in your district is offering and figuring out a way to integrate it with what you're already doing that you know works. Okay? Because ultimately, if you're not armed with any kind of science, the only thing you know is what has been working for you. And I think it's really, really important that we all recognize that there isn't one right way to teach. Because again, the way I teach works because it matches with my personality. Anything that I give you as advice today would have to be then filtered into your personality and made work for you, right? Which is why education is so hard to study. Yep. So if we're getting this new system, the more we can import it into as an option in our arsenal of things to do. But ultimately, and I think this is where, in case you're not following some of the jargon, this is important, we can't know what the right way is to teach because every time you try the new thing, it's going to be with a different group of humans. You can't do a controlled study. Okay? Because you would have to somehow figure out how to get that same group of students to be living in the same life experience and circumstances, and then go do all the thing again. And then erase from their memory the first time. Like, that's what you'd have to do. That's why social science just is very hard in that way. Okay? So I think the problem is that in education, this is an uncomfortable concept that I think some academics would hear me talk about this, and it's a little bit threatening, because we make our careers in higher ed by presenting research, and we want it to be like high quality and people to respect it. But ultimately, the problem with it is that if we do it to get the degree, and there's not ever going to be somebody coming back 5 years later asking you to replicate your experiment that you did. Because we don't really need that, so we go on and we move on. So if the evidence that we are gathering, and if these educational methods and whatever it is that we're doing are to be incorporated, and I think it's as Dr. Mitchell says, which is that they are simply incorporated as new options that we could choose from, that simply make our arsenal or our quiver of arrows, of educational arrows, even deeper. That's important. One more thing, and again, does this make our job harder? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It means that we are constantly responsible. We are the ones responsible for keeping up with what does the latest research say. So I mentioned this morning, kind of in passing, the topic of my morning session was not on how I actually run a rehearsal, but I did mention that in our class, we don't play notes for kids, ever. So from first day of school in 9th grade, no notes are played. They only get the tonic, and it is their responsibility to find their pitches from that, starting at beginners, and I don't care if they've never sung before. That is how we start. And ultimately, what I've discovered is that it takes them, you'd be surprised how little time it takes them to adjust to that expectation and just stop asking. So it is not a thing in my rehearsal for somebody to say, could you play the alto part at measure 22? They would never ask. And if a new student came into my class and asked for that, everyone would go, play it? And so the reason I bring that up is because in order to run a rehearsal that way, I have to be able to hear all the music in my head happening. Okay? When I was raised, like most of us, I was raised in rehearsals where all the notes are being played by an accompanist as we sing. Okay? So in order for me to run a rehearsal, I had to work on that. The genesis of it for me was that I could not do that. I could not do that 15 years ago. I can do that now because I worked on it, and I also got thrust into that by necessity. That's just one of many illustrations. So these are things, whether it's pitch or whether it's rhythm, or whether it's maybe for some teachers, if singing was not your background, maybe you're a pianist first, maybe it's vocal pedagogy insecurities. Whatever it is, we all have our thing that can lead us into maybe not offering the fullest, richest experience to our students as we possibly can. So in this last little part that I'm going to do before we have some discussion time is that as we think about all these things, as we kind of reflect, since this whole thing is about turning the mirror around. Okay, so as we reflect on ourselves, asking the wrong questions can become dangerous. So at the risk of continuing to say things in a very blunt way, I will say them, that sometimes music education philosophies get presented in a way that I disagree with. I've probably presented things here today that you disagree with. Bothers me zero. Okay? But that's part of me living authentically. I have to be myself. I have to present what I truly believe, or else you guys would see it really quickly. So I pulled up here this next slide. This is from Music Matters, A Philosophy of Music Education by Silverman and Elliott. I do recommend reading the book, but the reason I'm pulling it up is because it advocates asking, last time I did this was like on a big projector, so this is going to be tricky. Based on what I've told you today about my philosophy, is which of these questions do I like, and which of these questions do I not like, based on what we've already talked about today. So I'm going to give you a couple. I'm going to read 4, and I want to see if you guys can vote on which ones I don't like. Here's one. Will this form of musicking boost their confidence in their ability to learn how to perform, improvise, and compose? Will this kind of music motivate them to ask important questions about how to make music more effectively? Is it likely that my music teaching strategies will increase learners' self-sense of worth? And will my ways of teaching music motivate learners to continue making music after their elementary or secondary school years are done? I read 4. I like 2 of those, and I dislike 2 of those. That's a hint. I read number 3, number 4, and 6 and 7. I typically don't like made-up words that only people that took that class in grad school understand. Yes, but that's not why. That's not why. I don't like that word, but that's not why. You were right. Whoever said 3 and 4 is correct. And the reason that I don't like them is because they're not reflective. So will this form of musicking boost their confidence? It is my belief that forms of music don't make people confident. It's the way I teach you the music. I believe that a master teacher could sell any kind of music to any kind of kid. So it's not something magic about that type of music that makes that kid's eyes light up. This is still true today with my 30% not white choir that I have now, where I wish that the cultural influences were more predictable here, but I cannot predict by looking at that kid what kind of music is going to light up their eyes. I cannot predict. It is really interesting, actually, how unpredictable that is. And so I don't like the question for that, partly that reason, but also partly because it centers the inanimate object of the genre itself of music, rather than the very human interaction of how did I teach that music that contributed to the way that that kid either liked that music or didn't like it. Did I sell it? Did I do it justice? Did I present it in an enthusiastic way? Did I do that Indian raga piece while grumbling and grunting because I was scared of it? Or did I present it enthusiastically? I'm excited. In that example of the rhythmic context, I think it was also brought up this morning in one of the sessions where we're talking about this idea of making it like acceptable to have flaws. My kids know that I'm not confident with rhythms because I talk about it on like the first day or two. I've got drumline kids in my choir. They can read the pants off a rhythm that I can't read. So if I'm standing in front of the choir and I get to a passage of like triplets with dotted 8/16 within the triplets, and then the 16th is tied over to the next triplet, and then I see that stuff and I'm like, okay, drumline guy, will you tap that out for us? Because if I try it, I'm just going to get it wrong. And in that moment, I'm showing them that I'm part of the team. I'm not perfect, okay? And it's okay that you might have a thing, choir member, you might have a thing that you don't feel super confident with, but maybe that drumline kid is also not the best vocal soloist in the room, and that's okay too, because then he had his thing he can contribute, and then the vocal soloist kid can contribute that, and we start to build that culture. So I like questions like this, which is it likely that my music teaching strategies will increase learners' sense of self-worth? Okay? Because I'm putting them in situations that they have a chance to interact with that music and engage with it. I also like questions like this. Will my ways of teaching music motivate my students to pursue the lifelong goal of human flourishing, which includes happiness for themselves and others, fellowship, health, and well-being, a sense of personal significance, and other arts of personhood, which I love, which include individual and shared capacities and dispositions to act justly towards others? To me, these are the important questions that we ask. And then I will throw this in as we finish, all of these things on the bottom of the side, these teacher-centered questions, me asking me how I'm doing, okay? When we do those things, we will also end up just being better at making music. We don't choose between. We become the great choir, we become the great band, we become the excellent orchestra, whatever it is, by seeking to figure out how each piece becomes powerful. Like Benjamin Zander said, as conductors, we don't make a sound. We depend on our power. We depend on them discovering their power. That's what makes us look good. So even if our motivations are completely selfish, and we just want to be seen as the best choir director in the world, you would still be better off doing this because you will have better choirs. Okay, so I really like it when people are getting to the end of something like this, and I love looking out here and I see a lot of this, because it means we're thinking. So what are we thinking about? Questions, comments, discussion that are worthless and shouldn't be in school? I would say that I wouldn't say it that way simply because I recognize that even the best teachers might present a course for a kid, and let's say course means kids are enrolled from X date to this date, and we're trying to do music during this time, and sometimes we swing and miss. So I wouldn't say that means the class was not worthwhile. As long as we think, I very much like to think about stuff like I just talked about today, partly because I think of myself as an educator, as a professional educator who's doing this as a career, not a job. If I was in a job mentality, then I would maybe think about if I teach this one class, I evaluate my success on how this class did. But if I'm thinking I'm a profession, I do this as a profession, I'm thinking about what did I learn from this awful class that I taught, so that in the long arc of my career, however many thousands of kids that I might impact, what is my overall contribution to the landscape? I teach because I have this very strong belief that what we do impacts kids and impacts people. And as I mentioned earlier, I had a real rough time of things when I was a kid. And music for me, my music class, was my salvation. And if I can be that for one kid, then I've done my job. My mother passed away when I was 17. She had cancer. And I stayed home for about a week. and then came back to school. And my best friend Ben, who was in choir with me, came up to me and he said, "Why are you back to school already? You should be back home. Like, just go be with your family." And I said, "But I got to be in choir. I've missed choir already for 3 or 4 days. This is where I need to be right now." And so I believe that if we create an environment that is high quality, that, by the way, I've never really bought into the idea that high quality is, like I said this morning, is an antonym to being inclusive and bringing people in. I think it can be both. It has to be both, okay? So we create this environment where kids want to show up, and then they also feel like they can contribute something, whether it's the drumline kid or whatever, and they've got their thing that they're bringing, and we're all this big team. So yes, I think any educator that doesn't see that that is their role, I think just needs to kind of open up a little bit. Good. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
What's been your experience lately trying to make anti-fragile singers?
Yeah, so I think I understand what you're asking. Creating an anti-fragile choir for me, anti-fragile singers, it kind of goes back to this morning. I talked about being a master teacher, being a master carrot dangler. Getting kids to move past their comfort zone is also very much like the carrot dangler. If I've got a kid with like a pretty severe anxiety disorder, and they're like, it's a challenge to get them even to walk to the front of the room, let alone sing by themselves, then again, it's about the carrot. What situation could I put that kid in that does, I'm not going to say, "Oh, you have anxiety, I'm sorry, you can go ahead and sit down." That sounds harsh in today's culture, but I will not do it because I understand the psychology behind it. I could harm that kid by not asking them to challenge themselves at all, okay? But I might not make them do the same thing I make the other kids do. So let me give you an example. We do a little, either My Country 'Tis of Thee or God Bless America or something just that every kid knows as a way to voice the choir at the beginning of the year. I just need to see like who's got the high voices, who's got the low voices. If they don't know that song, we pick a different song, try to get everybody to sing just 30 seconds, right, at the beginning of the year. For one reason, it rips off the Band-Aid of just that, "Oh, we will sing in this class," okay? But then I also get to know their voice. But let's say you got that kid who, like, as soon as that, okay, oh, and it's shaking, and it's tears, and all of that kind of stuff. So what I do, I know we've been taught that we don't touch students, but I put my arm around that kid. I say, "We're going to sing, but we're going to go over here." "Well, this is still not far enough?" "Okay, that's fine. We'll go over here." And it could be that I put the kid on the other side of the door, shut the door, and put my ear up outside the door, and it was like, "Just sing, just if only I can hear you. That's fine." My country 'tis of thee. Sweet. And oh, yeah, bring them back in the room. And they've just been successfully brought into the fold of they sang by themselves. Because like I said this morning, we start where every kid is. Not every kid is willing to just step up there and, right? And so I don't know if that answers your question, but what I try to do is try to figure out a way for every kid, no matter where their comfort level is, they're still going to do the activity, but I might be getting super creative with how I modify that activity so that everybody's involved, everybody's doing it, but in a way that their first experience is attainable. You guys are deep in thought. I love it. Well, thanks, everybody. This has been really fun. And I will see you at whatever time I see you, 3:30, 3:45, something like that. It's going to be fun. Educational philosophy. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.